Cows Audiobooks presents The Secret Garden by Francis Hodgson Burnett. Read by M.p Temple. Chapter 1. There is no one left. When Mary Lennox was sent to Mistletoe Manor to live with her uncle, everyone said she was the most disagreeable-looking child ever seen. It was true, too. She had a little thin face and a little thin body, thin hair and a sour expression. Her hair was yellow, and her face was yellow because she had been born in India and had always been ill in one way or another. Her father held a position under English government and had always been busy and ill himself. And her mother had been a great beauty who only cared to go to parties and amuse herself with gay people. She had not wanted a little girl at all, and when Mary was born, she handed her over to the care of an ayah, who was made to understand that if she wished to please the mean Shahib, that she must keep the child out of sight as much as possible. So when she was a sickly, fretful, ugly little baby, she was kept out of the way. And when she became a sickly, fretful, toddling thing, she was kept out of the way also. She never remembered seeing familiarity in anything but the dark faces of her ayah and her other native servants. And they had always obeyed her and gave her her own way in everything, because the mean Shahib would be angry if she was disturbed by her crying. By the time she was 6 years old, she was as tyrannical and selfish as a little pig that ever lived. The young English governess who came to teach her to read and write disliked her so much that she gave up her place in 3 months. And when other governors came to try to fill in, they always went away in a shorter time than the first one. So if Mary had not chosen to really want to know how to read books, she never would have learned her letters at all. One frightfully hot morning, when she was about 9 years old, she awakened feeling very cross, and she became crosser when she saw that the servant who stood by her bedside was not her ayah. "Why did you come?" she said to the strange woman. "I will not let you stay. Send my ayah to me." The woman looked frightened, but she only stammered that the ayah could not come when Mary threw herself into a passion and beat and kicked her. She looked only more frightened and repeated that it was not possible for the ayah to come to Missy Shahib. There was something mysterious in the air that morning. Nothing was done in its regular order, and several of the native servants seemed missing, and those whom Mary saw sunk or hurried with ashy, scarred faces. But no one would tell her anything, and her ayah did not come. She was actually left alone as the morning went on, and at last she wandered into the garden and began to play by herself under a tree near the veranda. She pretended that she was making a flower bed, and she stuck big scarlet hibiscus blossoms in heaps of earth, all the time growing more and more angry, muttering to herself the things she would say and all the names she would call Sadie when she returned. "Pig, pig, daughter of pigs," she said, because to call a native a pig is the worst insult of all. She was grinding her teeth and saying this over and over again when she heard her mother come out of the veranda with someone. She was with the fair young man, and they stood talking together in low, strange voices. Mary knew the fair young man who looked like a boy. She had heard that he was a very young officer who had just come from England. The child stared at him, but she stared mostly at her mother. She always did this when she had a chance to see her, because Mean Shahib, Mary used to call her that oftener than anything else, was such a tall, slim, pretty person and wore such lovely clothes. Her hair was like curly silk, and she had a delicate little nose which seems to be disdaining things, and she had large, laughing eyes. All of her clothes were thin and floating, and Mary said they were full of lace. They looked fuller of lace than anything ever this morning, but her eyes were not laughing at all. They were large and scared, and lifted imploringly to the fair boy officer's face. "Is it so very bad?" "Oh, is it?" Mary heard her say. "Awful," the young man answered in a trembling voice. "Awfully, Miss Lennox. You ought to have gone to the hills 2 weeks ago." The mean Shahib wrung her hands. "Oh, I know I ought," she cried. "I only stayed to go to that silly dinner party. What a fool I was." At that very moment, such a loud sound of wailing broke out from the servants' quarter that she clutched the young man's arm, and Mary stood shivering from head to foot. The wailing grew wilder and wilder. What is it? What is it? Miss Lennox gasped. Somebody has died, answered the boy officer. You did not say it had broken out among your servants. I did not know, the me Shahib cried. Come with me, come with me. And she turned and ran into the house. After that, appalling things happened, and the mysteriousness of the morning was explained to Mary. The cholera had broken out in the most fatal form, and people were dying like flies. The ayah had been taken ill in the night, and it was because she had just died that the servants had wailed in the huts. By the next day, 3 other servants were dead, and others had run away in terror. There was a panic on every side, and dying people in all the bungalows. During the confusion and the bewilderment of the second day, Mary hid herself in the nursery and was forgotten by everyone. Nobody thought of her. Nobody wanted her, and the strange things happened of which she knew nothing. Mary alternatively cried and slept through the hours. She only knew that people were ill, and that she had heard mysterious and frightening sounds. Once she crept into the dining room and found it empty. Though a partially finished meal was on the table, and chairs and plates looked as if they had been hastily put back when the diners rose suddenly for some reason. The child ate some fruit and biscuits, and being thirsty, she drank a glass of wine which stood nearly filled. It was sweet, and she did not know how strong it was. Very soon it made her intensely drowsy, and she went back to her nursery and shut herself in again, frightened by the cry she heard in the huts, and by the hurrying sound of feet. The wine made her so sleepy that she could scarcely keep her eyes open as she lay down in her bed and knew nothing more for a long time. Many things happened during the hours in which she slept so heavily. She was not disturbed by the wails and the sounds of things being carried in and out of the bungalow. When she awakened, she lay and stared at the wall. The house was perfectly still, and she had never known it to be so silent before. She heard neither voices nor footsteps, and wondered if everyone had gotten well of the cholera and if all the trouble was over. She wondered also who would take care of her now that her ayah was dead. There would be a new ayah, and perhaps she would know some new stories. Mary had been rather tired of the old ones. She did not cry because her nurse had died. She was not an affectionate child and had never cared much for anyone. The noise and hurrying and wailing over the cholera had frightened her, and she had become angry because no one seemed to remember that she was alive. Everyone was too panic-stricken to think of a little girl no one was fond of. When people had the cholera, it seemed that they remembered nothing but themselves. But if everyone had gotten well again, surely somebody would remember and come looking for her. But no one came. And as she lay waiting, the house seemed to grow more and more silent. She heard some rustling on the matting, and when she looked down, she saw a little snake gliding along, watching her with her eyes like jewels. She was not frightened, because he was a harmless little thing who would not hurt her, and he seemed in a hurry to get out of the room. He slipped under the door as she watched him. How queer and quiet is it, she said. Sounds like as if there's no one in the bungalow but me and the snake. Almost the next minute, she heard footsteps in the compound, and then on the veranda. They were men's footsteps, and the men entered the bungalow and talked in low voices. No one went to meet or speak to them, and they seemed to open doors and look in their rooms. What desolation, she heard one voice say. That's a pretty woman. I suppose the child, too. I heard there was a child here, though. No one ever saw her. Mary was standing in the middle of the nursery, and when they opened the door a few minutes later, she looked an ugly, cross little thing, and was frowning because she was beginning to be hungry and feel disgracefully neglected. The first man who came in was a large officer she had seen talking to her father. He looked tired and troubled, but when he saw her, he was so startled that he almost jumped back. "Barney," he cried out, "there's a child here. A child alone, in a place like this. Who is she?" "I am Mary Lennox," the little girl said, drawing herself up stiffly. She thought the man who was very rude to call her father's bungalow a place like this. "I fell asleep when everyone had cholera, and I have only just waken up. Why does no one come?" "It is the child no one saw. exclaimed the man, turning to his companion. "She actually has been forgotten." "Why was I forgotten?" Mary said, stamping her feet. "Why does no one come?" The young man, whose name was Barney, looked at her very sadly. Mary even thought she saw him wink his eyes as if to wink tears away. "Poor little kid," he said. "There's no one left to come." It was in a strange and sudden way that Mary found out she had neither mother nor father left, that they had died and been carried away in the night, and the very few native servants who had not died had also left the house as quickly as they could get out of it, none of them even remembering that there was a Missy Sahib. That is why the place was so quiet. It was true that there was no one in the bungalow but herself and the little rustling snake.